generation of horror has its own defining traits. In the 30s, you had the classic monsters, with the 80s came the slashers, and in the 90s, the hot phrase was meta. And so, an era of horror films that are particularly self-aware were born. Sometimes this simply means that the filmmakers will give a quick nod and a wink to previous horror classics, and others there are full-blown discussions by the actual characters in the film regarding the fact they are completely aware that they're acting out a horror film. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the horror movies made all the more frightful and delightful by their own self-awareness, shall we? I am confined by the fourth wall, and also Ash from WhatCulture Horror, and these are the 10 greatest meta-horror movies of all time. 10. Gremlins 2: The New Batch. Why some people have a searing hatred for Gremlins 2: The New Batch will forever be a mystery. Taking place in an elaborate, big city skyscraper instead of a small town, returning director Joe Dante's follow-up finds the titular creatures causing insane amounts of mayhem as they take over the building. The film begins as a standard sequel before taking a sharp left turn into creative anarchy. The film's wildly subversive second half is a full-on assault of artistic inspiration that becomes less about furthering a plot and more about indulging in the director's perversely entertaining artistic whims, including an all-gremlin musical rendition of the classic Frank Sinatra tune, New York, New York. Is it indulgent? Absolutely, but in this case at least, that is far from a bad thing. 9. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Everything about Eli Craig's hilarious horror comedy Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is designed to turn the cabin in the woods subgenre upside down. Played to perfection by Alan Tudyk and Tyler Labine, Tucker and Dale are just two hillbillies who mean no harm and just want to enjoy their new vacation home, a rudimentary cabin out in the sticks. Much to their dismay though, they chose the same weekend to do up their new, slightly creaky cabin as a bunch of rambunctious teens do to go partying in the same forest. The teens later become convinced that the pair are out to murder them, and as a result, end up killing themselves by accident in gruesome and Darwin Award-worthy ways. The film could have easily failed at the first hurdle, and although the joke does begin to wear thin at the 1 hour mark, the warm tone, some great gory moments, and a genuinely funny script marks Tucker and Dale vs. Evil down as one of the best meta-horror experiences of recent times. 8. Funny Games. It makes perfect sense that filmmaker Mikhail Haneke would want to remake his psychological distress machine Funny Games for our reality TV-obsessed society. With its breaking of the fourth wall, Haneke's 1997 original is a fascinating and disturbing look at how audiences, in their own unconscious ways, act as willing participants to slaughter whilst watching scenes of torture and murder. Just like the 97 flick, Funny Games observantly views two sociopaths' meticulous destruction of an innocent family, complete with one villain's dialogue spoken directly into the camera. It is also entirely bleak, right down to the scene in which one of the bad guys dies but comes back thanks to a simple push of a rewind button. Many will say it is a showy, ridiculous bit of filmmaking for its own sake, but it wouldn't be Haneke if it wasn't totally audacious and provocative. 7. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Of all the directors that have made their living in the horror genre, Wes Craven was definitely one of the most creative. His final installment in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, New Nightmare, is a film that keeps his audience suspended between dreams, reality, and film, never sure which one you are actually seeing. In the film, producer Bob Shaye plays himself as he brings Craven back to the franchise and courts Heather Langenkamp to star in a brand new Nightmare film, despite the fact that her character Nancy died in 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, and Freddy Krueger himself bit it, seemingly for good, in 1991's aptly titled Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. But as the lines between reality and fiction blur, it becomes clear that what Craven is writing is the movie the audience is watching. A meta mind melt in which Langenkamp stars as both herself and Nancy, the original Nightmare on Elm Street final girl. The beauty of New Nightmare is how well Craven handles the self-reflective plot, giving the movie within a movie premise its much-needed scares by minimizing Krueger's funny one-liners used so overindulgently in the previous Nightmare sequels. 6. Fright Night. Honestly, it's not entirely clear why most horror critics and fans hated 2011's Fright Night remake so much. It's far from a Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 bad. But that's just the way it goes when you're revamping a film as beloved as director Tom Holland's 1985 original, starring Chris Sarandon as a charming bloodsucker who moves next door to a nerdy high school kid. A fan of late-night monster movies, the gullible and easily shook teenager detects his new neighbour's undead ways, and naturally, nobody believes him. Until it's too late, of course. Holland clearly approached his material from a real horror lover's standpoint, taking all of Fright Night's genre elements quite seriously. That Holland honours the genre while also staging all of Fright Night's supernatural moments with a cheerful smile on his face gives the flick a timelessly fresh quality. Thankfully, the movie keeps its self-aware charm in the 2011 updated version. 5. Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. The hugely underrated Behind the Mask flourished as a new brand of ironic horror because it knows about horror movies. Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, Michael Myers, they're all real murderers in the reality of this film. So, this clever mockumentary centres around a small-town serial killer named Leslie Vernon. In a vain attempt at self-promotion, he permits a film crew to follow him around, explaining why he has chosen this morally questionable career path and revealing tricks of the trade whilst debunking certain myths of his occupation. It's the slasher genre's answer to Man Bites Dog, and like that 1992 Belgian classic, Behind the Mask director Scott Glosserman nails the seesawing tone that all horror comedies need to master. When Vernon's murderous antics go south, the film is funny in the best pitch black sense of the word. Whenever Vernon stops laughing, puts on his memorable blank face mask, and starts hacking up flesh, Behind the Mask abandons all humour and matches any joke-free slasher movie's brutality. 4. The Cabin in the Woods. If The Truman Show had been a horror movie, it might have looked a lot like Drew Goddard's The Cabin in the Woods. The film opens in an underground facility where two lab techs, Sitterson and Hadley, are preparing for some sort of mysterious ritual. From here, the camera quickly travels to what is a much more familiar horror movie setup. 5 college students setting off for an air quotes peaceful weekend in the woods. On the surface, the group seems to be composed of all the regular horror movie stereotypes. The girl next door, the jock, his hot blonde girlfriend, the good guy intellectual, and the goofball comic relief. Though, of course, things aren't exactly what they seem. Deconstructing nearly every overused horror movie trope in the book, the film presents a lot of the silly things modern horror is rightly divided for. People wanting to split up, oversexed teens stripping down when they should be running off, and manages to come up with a clever way to make fun of it. As a result, in realising the place of the characters in this narrative, they are still likeable despite their stupid decisions, and the film is all the better for it. 3. Zombieland. Thanks to Shaun of the Dead, and more on that in a moment, it hasn't been easy for filmmakers to make horror comedies with zombies that don't seem derivative of the 2004 cult favourite. The only zom-com able to carve out its own space is Ruben Fleischer's Zombieland, the box office success that resurrected the format through sheer wit. The screenplay, written by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, is genuinely funny, mining consistent laughs and performed with spot-on gamesmanship by Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Emma Stone, and Abigail Breslin. Zombieland also introduces fresh ways to off the undead, including zombie kills of the week, such as someone dropping a grand piano on top of one of the ghouls. Any zombie movie that actually goes so far as to have helpful rules about how to survive printed right on the screen isn't likely to be lazy in applying pop culture tropes to the storyline. Luckily, Zombieland doesn't miss a trick. The film makes sure that you never forget the many traditions that have been hammered into you by the horror films of yesteryear. 2. Shaun of the Dead. A major turning point in the lineage of the horror genre, Edgar Wright's introductory entry into the Cornetto trilogy kickstarted a glut of British horror comedies that would come flushing down the pike in subsequent years, though none could quite live up to the brilliant wit, smart in-jokes and creative gore of Shaun of the Dead. To whip the film into shape, Wright and the film's co-writer/star Simon Pegg pooled their shared affinities for the classic George A. Romero zombie movies of old together, and more importantly, lampooned Romero's spot-on correlation that can be made with the lifeless corpses shuffling around aimlessly and uninspired adults drifting through life in dreary jobs and mundane surroundings. Wright uses every trick in the book to launch meta joke after joke at the audience. It is a love letter to past horror movies, but thankfully perfectly capable of standing on its own 2 feet if all the references go over your head. 1. The entire Scream franchise. You all knew this was coming. During the early 90s, the horror genre was floundering. All the major franchises had pretty much run out of steam by this point, and a fresh, smart perspective was sorely needed. So what exactly made this slasher so different? Unlike most smash hits, Scream didn't just inspire a fleeting rash of imitations, it created a ripple effect in both filmmakers and the film industry as a whole. Craven's seminal film about a slasher in Woodsboro who has a bone to pick with the friends and family of Sidney Prescott couldn't help but comment on the rules of the horror genre, only to turn around and turn the knife on each cast member. The method was simple. Have your characters expressly lay out the horror movie commandments, have them break said commandments, and then punish them or subvert the rule for doing so. This pattern follows the franchise all the way to its latest edition, but the original will always be the most potent, as well as the most fun. And that's our list. Which of these meta horror movies are your favourite? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. I've been Ash over on social media at Ash Millman, and this has been WhatCulture. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and come back again soon for some more spine-tingling horror content. Thanks for watching.